In today's episode of Trust the Process podcast, I'm joined by our newest team member, Coach Chris, as we dive into the key ingredients for a successful body transformation. From training strategies to nutrition tips and mindset shifts, we're breaking it all down to help you crush your goals. So let's get started.
Today our guest is our new coach, Chris. Welcome, Chris. All the way down from Leeds this time. It's not US. it's Leeds. Down to London. Chris is one of our new coaches. You started with us back in June this year, so you've been on a team for the last few months. First of all, how are you finding things with us, Martin Bugay coaching?
Yeah, good. Settling in well. I feel like it does sound less impressive of a journey when it's compared to people coming from America. So yeah, that's stolen my thunder a little bit. But yeah, settling in well. I'm kind of just getting to know everything, the systems, the people.
Yep.
Just kind of figuring out how everything works, and where I guess I can be most effective, I suppose, kind of within that organisation.
Yeah, but I think you've kind of found your way quite nicely and fairly easily from the beginning. You obviously have a huge amount of experience. How long have you been in the coaching industry?
It's circa 10 years now.
Yeah.
Be 11 years within the fitness industry,
Mm-hmm.
and then 9-10 years sort of coaching.
Yeah.
In some capacity.
Yeah. Awesome. It's great to have you on the team, and I wanted to, for the sort of purpose of this episode, to talk a little bit more about what we do, how we do things, because it's usually interviewing our own clients who finish the journey. It's usually the fat loss phase. They come over to London. They do a photo shoot with us. So that's kind of usually the case. But it's nice that we can sit down and have a chat. So let's talk about body transformations, which is our main core product. This is what we do, and how to achieve a successful body transformation. So I suppose we should really define what a successful body transformation is. So let's maybe start with that. In your opinion, what would you say is a successful body transformation?
I think from thinking about successful is obviously going to relate to the individual's goals, so their current situation, where they want to be, and then that is going to give you kind of that yardstick for measuring success, and that kind of gulf between those two, that starting point and that ending point, it is going to be hugely variable between individuals. And some people's goals are going to feel quite small in comparison to others, but if you look at that through a subjective lens, different individuals are in different situations, different barriers, different experiences.
Yeah.
If we've got somebody who's got no training experience, no real sort of history of looking after or controlling the sort of the nutritional intake, there's going to be a lot more education required, and that journey is probably going to be slower, especially in the early stages, because the progress that might be on the table isn't going to be as easily accessible from kind of a transformation standpoint to begin with, just because that training competency has to be built. That understanding of basic nutritional principles, how they can apply that to their everyday life. Then if we've got an individual who's got a real long history of training, very familiar with managing nutritional intake, we can kind of get into the more challenging things pretty quickly. Progress training, look at having some real structure around nutrition with potentially pretty aggressive targets, knowing that they've got those kind of foundational skills in order to manage and meet those targets that we wouldn't have with some of those more inexperienced individuals.
Yeah.
And I think obviously one of the things we always do, and I think is an essential part of that process, wherever you're going through it is getting a real clear understanding of what that starting point is.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's understanding what the goal is to start with, because without that we can't really measure anything either way. So, again, goes back to something I always talk about, which is the clarity. What's the goal? what do we want to achieve, where do we want to be in X amount of time. And so once we figure that out, then it's actually much easier to to measure that success. Because like you said, like, what do we define as success? If somebody gets, to halfway point and they've lost X amount of weight, they nutritionally make better choices, they sleep better, they've improved, their lifestyle habits, etc. That's already a massive success. Does it mean that, they didn't, let's say, get a six-pack or got into a photo shoot shape or whatever it may be? Well, again, success can be really measured in many, many, many different ways. If purely from like the aesthetic standpoint, I think a lot of people look at a successful body transformation as being completely shredded at the end of it. And that's absolutely fine if that's the goal. Because again, we have a lot of guys who come to us and photo shoot is not necessarily on the cards. That's not the end goal. They just want to improve the quality of their life. Yeah. They want to be healthier. They want to gain some knowledge around nutrition, training, all of these things. So again, that success is very much an individual thing. Now, how, I suppose the question that I always get asked is, what is the success rate, on the program? You've obviously been with us only a few months, so you're fairly new to the team. But again, I always say, if you finish the program and you didn't necessarily get a six-pack, that doesn't mean that you failed, because we have to look at all the other components of the program. How has your energy improved, your sleep, your stress levels, your nutrition, your general knowledge, all of these things. Like, if you can go through the program, there's no doubt. In this case, I would say, if you finish the program, you're 100% successful. So the success rate is 100%. Again, it's very much goal dependent. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and it's that thing of reverse engineering that kind of end goal. If everybody, in their mind is thinking that end goal is shredded photo shoot condition, and then it's reverse engineering how long is that process going to be? Because we know with some guys who sign up, 6 months is a reasonable time frame to achieve that kind of result. Some others, 12 months is reasonable. Yeah. But then if we've got individuals, who've got a significant amount of body fat to lose, reverse engineering that from that sort of end goal, it is going to be a lot longer duration. But the hardest thing would be in that situation, the more we've got to do to get them to that kind of ideal final destination, there's so many more variables, and we can't plan as specifically and with a set time frame in mind, because as things start to develop, everything changes, all the variables shifts. A person isn't the same person they are when they start 3 months in. Yeah, absolutely. And maybe what they want to achieve has totally changed after 3 months.
Correct. It happens all the time.
Yeah. And they might see that they're capable of more, or they might actually realise it's not what they wanted to achieve in a time frame isn't actually that viable, and the goal they have in mind, as much as we would manage those expectations and kind of come up with a realistic sort of time frame and game plan, people are always going to have in the back of the mind that maybe they think they could do more, or there's some way the next month is going to be the magical month, and that's where all of a sudden something's going to drastically change. So I think it's always being aware of what's realistic in a time frame, but at the same point not kind of putting a ceiling on that, because as somebody goes through those early stages, they could very quickly develop those habits, those behaviours that could really accelerate progress. And there's almost that sort of exponential growth you see, where the early weeks, the early months, there's a lot of effort required and maybe not a huge amount of reward. But as they go through, if they can maintain that momentum, we start to see that pay off really, really well. And if that's something they can carry on with for another month, another 2 months, that sort of 12-month time frame could become 6 or 9 months, if they could maintain that sort of velocity. But at the same time, how many people do we come across? And again, in the wider world, things don't stay perfect. Yeah. Things crop up, lifestyle issues come in, family, things change. So I think it's also having that ability to adapt and communicate the fact that what your goal was still the goal, but X, Y, Z's happened. You know, we're probably looking at maybe a little bit of extra time if we can't kind of manage or mitigate this immediately, if it's something that is unavoidable. And I think it's accepting that, because things like that are going to happen. You know, we're always looking for that result that the individual wants as that end goal, but at the same time, we're not going to compromise, you know, health, quality of life to achieve that. So that ability to be realistic and communicate that effectively, I think has been really valuable with a few people.
Absolutely. I think it's like a sliding scale, isn't it? You know, somebody comes to you with a goal, that's what they want to achieve, and then, you know, it's obviously it's down to us to sit down and make them aware and set realistic goals. But like I said, the sliding scale is, you know, like you said, with some people that envelope gets pushed because early on they kind of everything clicks and they start seeing massive improvements, great changes, and they feel like now they want to go for more. Yeah. You know, so the goal changes, everything shifts, the approach starts to change, all of that. But equally, on the other spectrum, there are people who, like you said, their circumstances in their life change sometimes for the worse, and we have to extend that timeline. And that doesn't mean that they are failing. It just means that we need to adapt our approach and just take that stress and pressure off their shoulders. So very much an individual case by case thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
So when we let's just take somebody who joins the program. They want to. The goal is to lose 30 pounds. They haven't really got much of an experience with training. The nutrition is all over the place. Kids, family, job, busy all the time, kind of juggling all of that stuff. Health is taking a dive. They've not been looking after themselves for you know, a very long time. But now it's the time they feel like they need to do something. Let's say an individual, like, you know, our sort of typical avatar, 35 to 55. How do we, let's just take somebody on a journey on how we start those journeys with clients. So obviously it starts with the initial consultation. We start with making sure that we understand what the goals are and we set realistic expectations. So client is assigned to you. How do you go about things briefly, just so people have an understanding of how this whole process works?
Is that initial point, obviously, that all that information we've gathered, when we get to that sort of, you know, just prior to that start point where things kick off, we've got all that information, you know, we've collected that, go through that, getting a really clear understanding of where are they at as an individual. Mm-hmm. You know, you talked about, obviously, nutrition, you know, what are the current dietary habits, because that's going to be really important for us to know. From a training perspective, you know, where is their output at? Are they training regularly? What's the training history? Mm-hmm. You know, what is the movement like? Have they got any issues there? Current recent injuries? That allows us to sort of create a really clear and structured program with the dailies, the weeklies. You know, what do we need to see? And it's essentially boiling it down to what are the daily actions we need to see to result in a goal, and focusing more on those processes. A lot of the results we achieve are going to be, you know, the indirect results of daily actions performed consistently.
Yeah.
And, you know, we think about that 30 pounds. We're not thinking about dropping that 30 pounds specifically, mm-hmm. but reverse engineering that, you know, what do we need to achieve in order for 30 pounds to come off?
Yeah.
And a lot of that is going to be tied into, you know, nutrition. We're going to have to create some form of deficit to you know, elicit fat loss. Output's most likely going to need to go up with most individuals we work with. Mm-hmm. You know, most people aren't getting even just sort of the daily activity required. You know, we think about sort of 50,000 steps across a week being that minimum threshold from a health perspective. We know if we go below that point regularly, we're going to see, you know, increases in a lot of health issues. So that would be kind of a minimum starting point for most individuals. and then we've got the option to ramp up that number, or think about introducing other methods of output, cardiovascular work, which, as well as increasing those levels of output, is going to have huge positive impacts on a lot of health markers, things like blood pressure, which again commonly we'll see elevated in guys we're working with, right? They're in stressful situations, day in, day out, months or years of poor nutritional choices, lack of activity. And we know that, again, from a health perspective, like the risk of cardiovascular issues is hugely increased if blood pressure is consistently elevated. Life expectancy is reduced significantly if we're spending time with those elevated markers. So if we can find a way to improve those numbers from a health perspective, create that deficit without having to be too rigid. Yeah. I think that's the important thing with most of the guys as well is, we need enough flexibility so that we can work with their kind of daily lives.
Absolutely.
If something's too rigid, it snaps. If it's too flexible, it isn't strong enough to get us to the end goal. So it's trying to find that middle ground. And again, with, training, same thing there. If we're asking for, 4 or 5 strength training sessions a week, when somebody just doesn't have that kind of time, we're already setting them up, not necessarily for failure, but for a challenging time where they're trying to juggle too many things at once and it isn't viable. Whereas if we can go in with, 3 good quality strength training sessions a week, where we can focus on improving that quality of movement, accessing sort of ranges they don't normally work with, getting them more confident in the gym initially as well. I think that's one of the biggest things from a training perspective. We want to get as competent as we can as quickly as we can, because then we're going to drive up confidence, which is going to allow us to push the individuals a lot further, and really build their confidence with training, which is something, especially with a long-term perspective in mind. We want to nail that journey with them and that program, but at the end of that process, they still need the ability to go off and train independently, if this is something they want to sustain indefinitely. So whatever we can impart throughout that journey, that's going to set them up, for the rest of their lives. That's something that, from our part, doesn't take a huge amount more within the those training programs, but if we can do that, that's invaluable for some of these guys.
Absolutely.
Long term.
I think some great points there, and I think it's worth mentioning that everything that we do is very much based on the client. Everything is very individual and bespoke because, again, that sliding scale comes in place where when we are talking about different approaches with regards to nutrition, training, lifestyle, we have to first of all understand where the person is and what the starting point is. Take that against, okay, what is the goal where you want to be? And then anything in between is down to us to manage, adjust for the client to make it as manageable as possible, take all the unnecessary stress away from that individual, because, usually they come to us and they are in very stressful situations. So piling a lot more stuff onto them is not going to help, is only going to make things worse. Yeah. So it's down to us to remove the unnecessary stress, improve their lifestyle, help them make better choices nutritionally, from a training perspective, etc. So yeah, again, if somebody is, for example, and we've had many clients who come to us training 5-6 days a week, not achieving any results. On top of that, being really overly stressed, having to juggle families, kids, poor nutrition, lack of sleep, etc. And then when you actually look at it, is it going to be something that is going to help them to get where they want to get? Training 6 days a week, it's just a lot of additional stress and fatigue on the body versus, okay, we don't have to do that. Let's be a lot more, it's about efficiency.
Yeah.
Removing all that, minimizing that stress, managing it, getting them into a much better place from a health perspective, like you mentioned, blood pressure, sleep, recovery, all of that, to get them into a nice place, build a good foundation to start with, and then build upon that.
Yeah, that's it, right? The progress we're looking for is going to come about from adaptations.
Yeah.
But if the system's too stressed all the time, we can't be in a position where we can positively respond to new stimulus.
Yeah.
So if we're constantly hammering something, we're just in a position where, the nervous system's just trying to keep up. maintain where they're at the minute. So forward progress isn't going to come by, hammering it even more. We need to think about where can we pull away some of the other stresses so that the stress we want to put on the system, to force those positive adaptations, we can apply more and more.
Yeah.
And I think with a lot of guys, the more simple that process can be for them, the easier it is to adhere to.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean it's easy, but if we can keep it simple until simple stops working, that's the way forward.
Absolutely.
We don't need complexity for complexity's sake.
Yeah.
A lot of the progress we're going to see, especially in the early days, is from consistently nailing the basics, which is something most people, especially when it comes to program, they're not doing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of that stems from the fact that the basics don't seem sexy enough.
Yeah.
How many
Everyone
times?
wants, yeah, absolutely.
It's nothing fancy, is it? If you're nailing your nutrition every day, you're getting your steps in, you're getting your 3 sessions a week, you're getting your couple of sessions of aerobic work in, you're looking after yourself where possible, outside of the gym, sleep's in a good place, you're managing that work related stress, just showing up like that, not even every day, but most days of the week, nailing most of the variables most of the time, is going to account for a huge majority of your progress.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're doing that on a regular basis, then it can be right. What is the complex stuff that can take it to the next level? But there's very few people, especially in those first 6 months, where that's even a thought. Because until you've been nailing those basics for a consistent period of time, they're not going to stop being beneficial.
Mm-hmm.
And if we drive up that complexity too early on, adherence potentially goes out the window, and we might get a week where, great, we've pushed harder with training, we've pushed a steeper deficit, we've got more output, but does that then have a positive an effect on the next few weeks? And then we see lower adherence because they've pushed themselves too hard, and then they try and, naturally they're going to want to potentially consume more food if the deficit's been too steep, pull back on the output if they've been trying to do too much. And then we might get a great week followed by a pretty poor week. Whereas if we can get two solid weeks, that's going to be more forward progress than one great week followed by whatever.
And I think also, from an adaptation standpoint, they are not in a place where they can handle more stress. So again, it's at the very beginning, it's all about removing the unnecessary stuff, getting them into a place where health is the most important thing, and that is the foundation. Health is the number one priority for us, for somebody who starts on the program, because if we can get them healthier, we can then prepare them for the next phases and next stages where we can add more stimulus, and instead of removing stuff, adding more, because they are in a good place to adapt to that stress.
Yeah, and we're a product of our past actions and behaviours, right? I think that's sometimes, in those early weeks, people will come on board and we put things into place, and, the adherence is there and they're consistent and they're nailing those basics.
Mm-hmm.
And from a results perspective, maybe those results aren't coming in as obviously as they'd expect.
Mm-hmm.
But, when we're dealing with individuals who've spent months, years, decades, not even thinking about nailing those fundamentals just from a general health perspective, not even thinking about, body composition or trying to achieve a transformation, but just, good quality food, plenty of nutrients, even things like hydration, and then poor sleep, excess stress, sedentary for a huge amount of the week for over years. The current status or their situation is a product of those behaviour and actions. And it's going to take more than a couple of weeks of positive actions to start on doing that. And, it's when we get to kind of that week 4, week 5, week 6, the results from those actions start manifesting. And it's not the actions they're performing in week 4, 5, and 6 that are causing that progress. It's the actions from week 1, 2, and 3 that's starting to become apparent.
Absolutely. I think, we could go probably forever, but I think one of the things that we see a lot with clients is patience, lack of patience, rather. And I suppose it's good to have these conversations in this format, because it's all about really sort of educating people on what's really important, because most people think of, okay, online coaching program, I'm going to get a meal plan and I'm going to get a training plan. It's all about nutrition and training. And there is so much more to that, because nutrition and training, as much as they are very important, I think, like you said, the absolute basics need to be in place first in order for them to be able to train better and actually understand how to train properly. And then from a nutritional perspective, gain the knowledge to understand the right food choices, to understand calories, to understand macronutrients, and all of that. So let's just, for a second, take, again, somebody who comes into the program. What are the first things that we look at from like a program perspective, coaching perspective? What do we want from a freshman who starts with us? So what sort of data do we need on a daily basis, and why?
Yeah, so all around health perspective, there's some key markers that are really useful for us to get in the first place, and then sort of keep an eye on in those early stages. Things like blood pressure, resting heart rate, really give us a good all-round view of sort of general overall health at that start point. We tie that in with body weight, and we get a good idea in relation to the height, using kind of BMI as a rough reference in the early stages, like we can see from a health perspective where they're kind of sitting there. Progress photos, those initial photos as a starting point, gives us a good idea of again, where they're at, what do they look like from a structural perspective, body fat levels, where are they storing that, just how do they look in general. You'll get pictures and it's quickly pretty clear that they're not in a great place health-wise, just because of how they're presenting themselves. We tie that in with sort of the initial information around what a day looks like for them, what a week looks like for them. We can start seeing, where are those opportunities to make those small changes. Find that low-hanging fruit where we can get some, quick wins. Because as much as we talk about those results maybe not being immediate, requiring a couple of weeks of effort to kind of start manifesting, we can identify those areas where we can quickly see changes. And even if it's in, opening up an individual's eyes into, it's only been a week, but already we've managed to identify areas where we can, increase that daily output with minimal effort required. Simple changes with nutrition, just some swaps here and there, improving those habits. Hydration, one of the biggest things. Most people who come to us are definitely on the lower side when it comes to water intake. And again, it's such a simple thing. And it isn't an easy thing, to change. If you've been consistently, consuming small amounts of fluid throughout the day, and that's just how you've been going about your business, all of a sudden saying, right, we need to see that water intake increase, isn't something that just happens. As much as it is a case of just drinking more water, which again, it's an easy thing to say, but to them change, the habits of many years can be a challenge. But if, we can find a way to, increase that water intake pretty quickly, we're going to notice changes in energy levels, mood, even day-to-day performance outside of anything related to the program. Just that cognitive function, that awareness, that ability to focus at work, and if we can improve how somebody is at work, does that reduce stress from that aspect of the life, and then that gives us a little bit more wiggle room to make these decisions. With the other things, we can push a little harder here or there. Training nutrition if they've got less to worry about. And I think that the most challenging thing, especially in those early stages when we're thinking about that data we want to gather, is getting into the habit again of tracking it regularly. It's not something people are doing. With technology now, it's much easier. We've got access to all these bits of kit that do the work for us. Smart scales that are going to ping that body weight into the app without us having to manually do it. And again, it's just something, if we can pull away the stress of something, it's a small thing, but if something just becomes a habit and then you're doing it daily, only takes a couple of weeks before you almost begin to feel out of place when you're not doing it. That's the kind of thing we're looking for. The new norm is this, and when I'm not doing it, something don't feel quite right, as opposed to the occasional times you do it, That's the difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And also on that note, I feel like it's an opportunity to remind people that it doesn't. I mean, it didn't take client X to get to the shape or place where they are now, and they need to lose 30 pounds. It didn't take them 6 months to get there. They didn't put that weight on in 6 months. It's usually, the accumulative process of months, years of bad nutrition, bad habits, lifestyle, etc. So it's making sure that they really understand that changes will pretty much happen from day one. Because psychologically, when you sign up to a program, the changes are already happening there. From a psychological standpoint, they already by default make better choices without even necessarily knowing. But nutritionally, etc. 2 weeks in, to say that you can't really see visible results is a little bit ridiculous, because again, we are all about those positive changes from energy perspective, recovery perspective, sleep, decreased stress, better nutritional choices, etc. Like, that's all massive progress. But everyone, I think, is so fixated on seeing changes in the mirror.
Yeah.
And those physical changes, yes, as much as they great to see, and they will come, they come at a much, much later stage, because again, we need to set those foundations and prepare the body and put it in a position where it can drive those results in that way.
Yeah. And, why are a lot of the people doing these basic things that lead to results? Activity levels are low, and it's because they feel pretty crappy all the time.
Yeah.
And that's, a byproduct of that poor nutritional intake.
Mm-hmm.
A lack of daylight. How many people now, very sedentary, a lot of time at a desk during the day, then a lot of time on the sofa when they're at home. Mm-hmm. And how hard would it be to go out and do some steps? But, if you're feeling low on energy all the time, mood's poor, you're not going to do it. Yeah. But if we think about, quality of food intake has improved, hydration has improved, and now we've got increased energy levels, better mood, better focus and concentration at work, so maybe we get work done in less time. Now we've all opened the door for that activity level to increase, because
Correct.
We've got the energy.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Subconsciously, we're going to move more. Yeah. If you don't have energy to spare, what's the reason to move? Whereas if we're in a position where we've increased that ability to produce energy, we're going to end up doing things we might not even, proactively go out of our way to do. But all of a sudden, saying yes to things becomes easier. That opportunity to go out and get some daylight, get some fresh air, get some steps in, becomes something that's more appealing, because we've got the ability to do so. And then we're moving more, so, sleep improves because we're more active, and then we're sleeping better. So off the back of that, we feel better. It's trying to get into kind of that positive cycle. And if we lay that foundation early on, everything becomes so much easier. Whereas if we're thinking about, let's try and get into those real challenging areas straight off the bat, if we don't get that right in a couple of weeks, what does that do to somebody's momentum? We'd rather have that ask be a lot lower and that achievement be a lot higher. Yeah. And somebody comes away from, the first couple of weeks feeling great and like they've accomplished everything that was asked of them. And then from there, we can layer things on. And they're going to feel much more up to the task and confident of, taking that on and asking for more. And they'll start proactively identifying opportunities for progress themselves. I've got time here, I've got time there, I could make better choices here. And like you said, when we sign up to a program, we automatically start making better choices. And a lot of that ties into that awareness.
Yeah.
We're all of a sudden thinking about things. Those choices we make around food, we actually start thinking about that instead of those, habits we've got where we just, without even thinking, we're going for the wrong sort of choices. We're consistently eating more than we need, drinking excessively. All of a sudden now we're viewing things through a different lens. And as that education builds in those early phases, it becomes pretty apparent to a lot of the individuals that this is where things are going wrong. I've accrued a significant amount of body fat because for quite a lot of years, I've not been thinking about the choices I've been making.
Yeah. And this is this is something that I see a lot with we all see a lot with clients is that impatience comes from that process, that switch from it being very unconscious for for a very, very long time, that lifestyle and those habits being very unconscious, to suddenly when you join the program everything becomes a very conscious choice. Your food, everything that you put into your mouth from a nutrition perspective, your hydration, your movement, your daily activities, all of that stuff, you start tracking food and really being aware of what's going on daily basis. And I think for a lot of people that drives that impatience, because suddenly you are 2 weeks in, which in a grand scheme of things is absolutely like nothing. 2 weeks is nothing. It's, let's say, 14 days, but it's 14 days of a very conscious work, day in, day out. And that can be overwhelming for a lot of people. They look back and in their head, it's like, I've been doing this for so long now. It seems long because it's been conscious. Yet you've been doing years of unconscious stuff previously, and you got to a point where you're suddenly 40, 50, 60, 70 pounds overweight. Your health is completely rock bottom. And now, you have to work and you have to put the work in. So, that realization comes in. And that's, I think, where at this stage, a lot of people become very impatient. It's like, oh, I'm not getting any results. Well, hang on a second. Let's look at how you have changed. Let's look at all the positive stuff that you have implemented. You feel a lot better, you move a lot more, you make better choices, you have more energy, all of that stuff. These are massively positive changes, and that's what drives that progress. So at this stage, all we need to do is keep that momentum and keep that consistency. So, right, let's say we are at this stage, 2-3 weeks in, a client has a good baseline of everything. We sort of slowly getting the foundations in. Let's talk about training. Let's talk about, all the other aspects of it. So for majority of clients, I would say 3 solid sessions of weight training a week is like the sweet spot. Given that they have busy lifestyles, families, all of that stuff, I think everybody, or most people at least, can squeeze in 3 good sessions and actually become a lot more efficient with their time, be more productive and free more time for other tasks that they have going on in their life. Would you say?
Yeah. And, how much work do you do in those sessions is going to influence, how many sessions a week you might prescribe. Mm-hmm. If we're short for time on a daily basis, maybe an extra session a week, a lower total duration. Maybe it's 4 shorter sessions. But generally 3 sessions is a really nice spot, because from a schedule perspective, we can have, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. So we can get a good quality session, then we can have a day of rest, and then we can follow up with another good quality session. And, in those early phases, intensity, it's going to feel like it's challenging, but in reality, the intensity is going to be pretty low, especially in experienced trainees, because they just don't have the ability to reach those high levels of intensity yet. Mm-hmm. They can't eke that out of the nervous system because they've not, it's a skill, they've not trained.
Yeah.
And we're not looking for anything too demanding in the first place anyway, because we thought, that stimulus adaptation, they don't have the room to adapt to those high level stimuli. So it's pointless putting them in there, because all we're going to do is accrue, a bucket load of fatigue, and we're not going to see any upside to that.
Great point. Sorry to jump in, because I think it's important. A lot of people would at this point be in a place where, okay, I'm starting a journey. I'm going to print out a program off the internet. Okay, it's a 5-day split. They go to the gym and a lot of volume. The fatigue is building up very, very quickly on top of a hectic lifestyle at this point, if they haven't got a coach, for example, usually coupled with a pretty aggressive nutritional approach. They slash calories aggressively, initially they may see drop in weight and they can deem that as success, but that's a very short-sighted view of potential success, because very soon most people get to a point where they hit plateau. They don't know how to come out of that, how to keep making progress. From energy standpoint, everything is downregulated because they're not recovering. They're not getting enough energy from food. Therefore, they cannot expand that energy through activity and training, and they cannot put that that needed stimulus in the gym, right? So, going back to what we were talking about, everything has to be really intelligently programmed for somebody like that to make sure that at every point they actually are progressing rather than regressing.
Yeah. It's important to consider as well, that so many ways you can set up a training program to be effective, and not every training program is going to look the same.
Yeah.
There's so many ways on paper you could put together that program, and you're going to end up with, the same end result for that individual. But there's so many things to take into consideration, their current circumstances, personal preferences, the schedule. If somebody's only got 30 minutes to train 3 times a week, that program is going to look different to somebody who's got 3 lots of 60 minutes, and the principles are still the same. The outcomes we're looking for are still the same, but how we have to achieve them is going to differ. And I think, we often see that kind of thirst for higher levels of volume, the expectations that training should be a significantly, long event. If I'm not in the gym for an hour, it's not beneficial.
If I don't crawl out of that gym, that's not a good session.
This is it, right? And adherence is super important. If we can't adhere to something, we're not going to consistently do it, and we're not going to be able to accumulate enough positive actions to see that progress. And I think, especially in those early stages when somebody starts a program, motivation's high, but we know motivation is fleeting, and it's going to be up and down. And, week 1, week 2, that thirst for training, that for hard work and for suffering is there. And, people feel like they can do pretty much anything, right? And, we could give somebody a really challenging program, something that's going to really fatigue them, really push them. And, week 1, great. Week 2, DOMS has hit, energy levels are low because, they're not used to being in the kind of deficit maybe they're in. They push things too hard. And then week 1's amazing training. Week 2, non-existent. Week 3, pretty poor. They get to week 4, maybe they feel ready to go again. But we've had, 1 out of 3 weeks of good quality training.
Yeah.
Whereas if we're more reasonable and meet them where they're at, and help them to understand that right now you simply can't handle the kind of workload you think you want. And, we pull that right down and we think about focusing on the quality. The other thing is as well, if we drive up that volume, quality is going to suffer hugely.
Yeah.
From a mental aspect, asking someone to go in a gym and, perform 20, 30, 40 sets of training when they don't have the experience, how are we going to see good quality work when the mental effort required, to perform 1 set is going to be pretty high if they don't have any experience with these movements.
Yeah.
They don't have any of those, the neural pathways don't exist. That competency is so low, every set is a challenge having to think.
Yeah.
Not just physically, but how do I do this movement?
Correct. Yeah.
What am I doing at the bottom? What am I doing at the top?
Yeah.
But then over time, as that competency develops, it becomes much less demanding because, they can perform a lot of things subconsciously. And, it might now and again require a little refresher of just, focusing on that movement and making sure that the quality is there. Sending a video through, making sure that tempo's on point, range of motion is there, and the intensity is there. Because that's another thing, being able to drive intensity through a movement is a skill.
Yeah.
And it requires a lot of practice. And if you're performing a movement and all you're doing during that movement is thinking about what am I supposed to do at every point, which is normal in those early days, we're not really in a position to drive intensity there.
Yeah.
And that's where that patience and focusing on those basic movements. And often again, on paper, that training program is going to look super simple. But if you perform it with the the relevant intensity and the right focus. You know, the training programs we create, they're not easy.
Yeah.
They're simple.
Yeah.
They're effective. And a lot of the times, people who've got a training history will look at them and think, that's potentially a very easy program. But until you've experienced, some of the things you need to be exposed to in those early stages, you don't really have an awareness of how challenging it can actually be. Emphasizing time in lengthened ranges, increasing the amount of reps we're performing, reducing rest time, so, to drive up that relative intensity without having to actually give them more work.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many variables we can play
Absolutely.
with, and it's just avoiding getting caught up in that kind of old school train of thought.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's so important. I think there are so many variables within a training program that that can be deemed as progression or looked at as progressive overload. Like you said, it could be tempo, it could be rest periods, it could be like so many things, but people only focus on exercise and load and volume. That's usually the sort of way that most people think. So I suppose the overarching message from this conversation so far when it comes to training is that there is so much more to a training program or training program design. It's not just about printing something off the internet and following blindly without any understanding and any rationale behind why certain movements and exercises are there. There is so much more to it, and people should really be aware of that. So that's why you hire coaches who have the experience and the knowledge and understand what needs to be done in order to take somebody from point A all the way till the end with a good result. So, right, so we've got training. We obviously have got lifestyle. Nutritionally, let's talk about nutrition because I think it's one of the biggest sticking points for a lot of people. Again, somebody wants to lose body fat, wants to lose weight, just by an example of somebody who would come to the program, how would we approach the nutrition side of things? So first of all, we need to understand what's actually going on in their life right now before starting the program. So we need to, again, do the assessment from a nutritional standpoint. Okay, how many calories are you actually consuming? It's not just about, okay, here is a number, off you go, and hopefully, you adhere to everything. Let's just look what's going on in your life right now on a daily basis. Let's track what we can, so then we have an idea of, the foods that you like, the choices that you make, the habits that you have, the calories, the macronutrient breakdown, all of that stuff. It gives us, so collecting that data is incredibly important for us from a coaching perspective because it paints a picture of who we are dealing with and what are their habits. So let's go with approaches. What sort of approach, given that we are not necessarily massive fans of meal plans. I think they have absolutely place and time, but generally our approach is macronutrient and calorie targets and gives the client the flexibility to make their own choices while we are sort of educating them on what healthy choices are.
Yeah, and I think in those early days, the big thing is looking, to connect those dots and look for those patterns and those trends.
Yes.
We know most people who join the program are going to be overweight, accumulate excess body fat, and that's going to be, years of excess calorie intake. And that's from, poor choices, lack of understanding, lack of knowledge. In most cases, we're going to need, that calorie deficit because that's the only way we're going to achieve fat loss. How that deficit is created is going to vary from person to person, and that's going to depend on their current habits. We want to think about what are they doing right now, how can we move that in the right direction, rather than, coming up with a totally new approach, with no basis in their current habits and behaviours. Can we steer them in the right direction, rather than going, right, here's a system, find a way to fit into it. We know what the basic principles we're looking to achieve are. we most likely need a calorie deficit. We most likely need to increase protein intake, increase nutrient intake. You know, most people these days, nutrient, especially with food quality being so low, the choices they're making, we're going to need to see that increased. You know, what are their choices around times of the day? You know, we're going to see a lot of individuals who aren't really consuming any food in the mornings. You know, they're running off coffee, you know, energy drinks. And that's not really a good place to be in. You know, no issue with caffeine whatsoever. It's you know, it's a great tool, has its place. But if we're, you know, relying on a lack of food to get us through the morning and then moving into, you know, the afternoon and the evening, we're going to be making pretty poor choices. You know, we'll often find people don't feel that they're over-consuming calories because they're not eating for a huge chunk of the day.
Yes.
So, you know, there's no way I'm eating too much because I'm only eating, you know, from 4 p.m. until bedtime.
Yeah.
But we know with, you know, the food choices available today, you know, calorie-dense foods, hyper-palatable, super easy to digest because they're already so processed. We don't need to do much breaking down.
Yeah.
So, you know, we don't get the satiety we'd get from a lot of foods. So we can keep consuming, and we kind of never get that feeling of being full, being satisfied. Yeah. We quickly find, you know, that calorie over consumption is happening. That body fat is accruing over time. So if we can find a way to, you know, reduce that calorie intake, switch the focus with food. You know, we're looking to fuel the body. We want to drive performance. Yes, we are removing calories, but a lot of the time we actually end up increasing food volume with people.
Yeah.
Because the choices they're making are so poor. You know, if we can switch the focus, thinking about, you know, good quality whole foods, like I said, high protein, high nutrient focus, the amount of food you can consume and still remain within a calorie deficit, especially in comparison to a lot of these individuals' previously choices, it's a lot of food.
Yeah.
And the amount of guys who, you know, in those early stages sometimes struggle with the amount of food it is because they're just not used to eating that much.
Usually what we get is, I never thought that I would be eating so much food and losing weight. That's usually the comment that most people give us.
This is it. And, you know, if we increase vegetable consumption, like the amount of vegetables you can eat and still be within a pretty low calorie target, you know, if we're making those choices that don't bring about any positive, you know, nutritional benefit, it's not a lot of food. But then if we switch that focus, you know, from a satiety perspective, like most people, they're never full. They're never necessarily hungry, but they're always craving something.
Yeah.
Right? You know, they don't have an appetite, but they get to the end of the day, you know, again, if we're not consuming food and we're working all day, we get home, the body needs something. You know, it wants that glucose. And it's going to, cravings ramping up are that signal, right? We need something going in, but we don't have an appetite.
Yeah.
So then we're making those choices that we know it's rapidly digestible foods, stuff that's often, again, high in calories, you know, often high in carbohydrate, which again on its own isn't a problem. But again, the individual we're working with, from a metabolic health perspective, they're not in a great place. So they're not going to handle carbohydrates very well, especially if we're consuming them excessively. And we're not exercising, you know, we don't have a good ability to deal with that. So in the short term, you know, pulling some of those carbohydrates out is often, you know, a strategy that we'll take. And it isn't a no carb, it isn't really a low carbohydrate approach, but it's a lower carbohydrate approach because considering what they were eating before, it's significantly less carbohydrate. But it doesn't mean it's a lot less food because we're just shifting that focus. And I think the key thing is, you know, we want food going in. It's not about starving. You know, it's not about pulling out food until there's that little left. We don't have a choice but to lose body fat.
Yeah.
It's creating that positive environment.
I think on that note, it's important as well that we mention, because yes, absolutely, that, you know, it's one of many approaches to nutrition and to kind of coaching somebody from a nutritional standpoint, because we've had clients whose goal would be to lose, let's say, 20 plus pounds. Their starting point, they were overweight, etc. And we had a lot of cases where we would start somebody like that on a much higher carbohydrate and calorie content, simply because from a psychological perspective, it's such an individual thing, because it very much comes down to having that that discussion with somebody on day one and looking at their history. Because usually a lot of guys who come to us, they would have probably dieted many, many times before. They would have tried many different approaches. They would have been on massively restricted calories, and they would yo-yo up and down, losing weight, gaining weight, losing weight, gaining weight. So a lot of the times is those preconceived ideas that when they start a program like this, it's almost a given that they will be with a very drastic calorie deficit with a very aggressive approach. So if that's the case, we a lot of the times go almost the opposite and give them a lot more food to start with, so they don't feel like we are taking food away, and it doesn't feel like, oh my God, it's going to be a grind, it's going to be so hard, whatever. No, we actually almost force them to eat all that food, because that removes that fear of, okay, if I can eat all this, start on that many calories, and still achieve great results, psychologically there is a shift. And from then on, we start making changes. Yes, we are dropping those calories. We are removing certain macronutrients, or manipulating those macros. But that's also one of the approaches that we have done for a very long time, and very successfully with a lot of clients, who again came with that fear of, am I going to only be eating salads? Yeah. So I think it's very important to highlight the fact that it's such an individual thing. Not one client is going to have the same as somebody else, both from training perspective to nutrition approach to lifestyle. Everyone is different. And I think people out there need to realize that joining a program like this, it's very much all about the individual.
Yeah. And, there's huge variations in calorie intake between individuals. That's going to be productive.
Yeah.
And circumstance plays a part. If you're 300 pounds compared to 160 pounds, there's going to be a difference there. What level body fat are you at? Do you have a significant amount of muscle mass? Mm-hmm. What can you deal with as an individual? Mm-hmm. Is there an urgency? Yeah. If someone's significantly overweight, health markers are in a real dangerous spot.
Totally.
That body fat's got to come down quicker.
Yes.
Because we know the ill effects that's going to have. But if you're in a place where you want to lose 30 pounds, maybe blood pressure's slightly elevated. That resting heart rate's higher than we want to see it. Mm-hmm. We're not in a great place mentally, perhaps. Struggling a little bit with that body image, and that's getting us down. We know with those kind of numbers, there's a need to get it down at some point.
Yeah.
But we've got a little bit more wiggle room, because if we take 6 months to do that rather than 3 months, especially as we start seeing progress, that's going to improve a lot of those numbers and those feelings straight away. We're going to be in a position where that's more likely to carry on happening. Whereas, if there isn't a real urgency and we start pushing the ask and that requirement and driving that up, do we get anything out of that? Whereas if, like you said, we take that slightly less aggressive approach, we get that buy-in, we start seeing positive changes, we build that momentum, and then you get people at the point where it's like, right, what's next? They're feeling good, it's manageable, they've been dealing with it, they're in a great routine. Mm-hmm. Training's going well because they've got the fuel there.
Yeah. And I think, great point. I think a lot of the times also with certain individuals is just switching the macronutrient breakdown, because most people overconsume highly caloric foods where majority of those calories come from fat, actually. So, because I think nowadays a lot of people are aware of carbohydrates. So by default, it's been so drummed into them, through various different channels, social media, etc., where they are very aware of carbohydrates. So they tend to make more sort of conscious choices when it comes to carbohydrate consumption, but majority of those calories are going to sneak in from fat. So switching that up, allowing them to have more carbohydrates, pulling that fat content down, and actually, we get so many guys that have these realizations when they start reading labels, start tracking food. Like the amount of food that they fat that they consume is just ridiculous, and that's where majority of those calories come from. And then when you switch that over, suddenly they get to eat more carbohydrates, they have more energy, they move by default, they start moving better, they feel better, they recover better, they can push better in the gym. Everything changes, and it's like a eureka moment. So again, it's like we were discussing yesterday. Everything when it comes down to fitness, lifestyle, health, coaching, etc., it very much depends. It depends on so many things, so many variables. It's an individual thing.
Yeah, and we know a lot of the basic requirements are going to be the same from a broad perspective.
Yeah.
But when it comes to the actual prescription of those elements, that's where that variety is present, and it's dynamic. What one person needs from 1 week to the next is totally different. From 1 month to the next is totally different. And we're not going to change things every week for the sake of it, but it's finding where is that kind of middle ground between what we know the need from 1 week to the next. Where can we sit where we know we're going to see progress, but it's manageable, on those challenging weeks.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing with life in general. It isn't always predictable, and it is hugely dynamic. And we as individuals, from a physiological perspective, hugely dynamic beings. So if we know there's a lot going on, there's a lot changing, and again, we're trying to think about, right, let's try and stick to a really rigid approach and a really rigid structure. It's going to work for, maybe 1 in 5 people, and they're going to do really, really well, and they're going to thrive off it. But you're going to, those other 4 out of 5 probably going to struggle.
Yeah.
Maybe they do great for 3-4 weeks, but then that week hits where, life gets hard again, something crops up, and that fixed approach just doesn't work.
Yeah.
I think that's why, those early days, we really, push people to get that information coming in. And, sometimes it can be a challenge. And I think it's really important that, we just keep stating the importance of the more information we have, the better program we can come up with. We can create a program with no information, but is it going to be as effective as the one we create when we've got all the information? Probably not. For some people, it will be. That's always going to be the case. Some people will do much better, whatever the situation.
Yeah.
But, if we can pull in all that information, create a really clear picture. And I think what's really helpful for a lot of the individuals is providing that information. Not only does it paint a really clear picture for us, but it builds that awareness for them.
Yeah, absolutely.
If somebody's not been tracking any health markers, they take the blood pressure, it's elevated, all of a sudden it's like, well, I didn't know that. And that's something that's hugely important. Dietary intake, how many people don't realise the amount of food they've been eating. So if you can build that awareness straight away, before we even implement any, set actions or guidance, they're going to be thinking about it, and they're probably already taking, positive steps. The amount of guys we see kind of in the, those weeks prior to the start date on the program, who lose, noticeable body fat, body weight drops, steps increase. Yes, there's that element of I'm being watched, so there's that accountability aspect.
100%.
But they've discovered, partly what the problem is already.
Yeah.
And they know, we all know we need to make better food choices. We probably all need to move more. We need to sleep better. We need to, manage stress more. But how do we do that? And when do we kind of, take that leap? So as soon as we start on a program where I know I'm going to be told to do X, Y, Z, why are I doing it already? I want to start the program. We're going to start in a week or two. We're still kind of in that onboarding process. But if you're going to make positive changes, there isn't a perfect time, right? Yeah. So why wait till Monday? We see that a lot, in the wider world, but it's the guys we work with as well, it's I'll start Monday. And what's special about Monday? There is no difference about Monday.
New year, new resolution. Next week, Monday is fresh start. Next month, this, that, and the other. Yeah, it's like waiting for that perfect time that never there is no perfect time.
Yeah, and it almost becomes a bit toxic in that the fact we've got that ability to just push things off. We make a bad decision, right? We'll get back on it tomorrow.
Yeah,
we'll get back on it next week. But there isn't a need, to wait. Any positive choice you make has a benefit.
Yeah.
If you have a terrible day, but you cap that off with making one positive choice, it's credit in the bank. Same thing across a week. If you've had a terrible week, but you nail a day, you get a training session in, you get your steps in, nutrition's in a better place, you get plenty of water, that still has a positive impact. It isn't negated by the fact you've had, maybe 6 challenging days. Yes, you're not going to progress as quickly as you would have, but why have a poor 7th day on top of the 6 you've already had?
Yeah, I think it that ties in nicely with the fact that unless you actually have a big enough why, it's very hard for people to pull the trigger and actually start making positive choices, because there's always going to be that next Monday. There's always going to be the next month. There's always going to be the New Year's resolutions. You have to, again, and I, drum that, is you have to have that reason why you want to achieve better health, better physique, all of those things. Because without that, it's actually very hard for a lot of people to make that initial step. Combine that with lack of knowledge, not really understanding or knowing where to start. Yes, you can start another diet, but I feel like a lot of the times people have that mentality that last time I failed, yes, I've lost 5 to 10 pounds, but I couldn't sustain that. So going back to what we were talking about when we were talking about nutrition, I think sustainability is something that we also start as a foundation. Going back to our, how we pick the approach, because most people, what do they do? Oh, I heard that intermittent fasting is amazing. I heard that paleo is great. I heard that, X, Y, and Z diet is amazing. But I always say, unless you can maintain such diet for, months or years, it's probably not the one. You need to pick an approach and stick with an approach that will allow you to continue for years to come. And that's why I think, kind of educating people and giving them the freedom and flexibility and educating them around nutrition, calories, macronutrients, all of that kind of instills that mindset of, okay, if I understand food labels, if I understand calories, if I understand energy in, out, activity levels, all of that stuff, lifestyle, like that builds such a great foundation to, for somebody to really maintain and sustain a great lifestyle for the rest of their life.
Yeah, and it's that flexibility. If you understand the principles and you've got a really good fundamental knowledge of, nutrition, that equips you for life. Yeah. And, it doesn't have to be a setup that's sustainable indefinitely, because there's going to be periods of time, where, especially when you're in the program, we're looking to pull fat off. Yeah. And that's going to require sometimes a fairly aggressive deficit.
Absolutely.
And how you create that deficit is based off, sound nutritional principles, which remain the same in 5 years' time when you're just looking to, stay healthy and maintain body weight. Mm-hmm. The choices you make change, but the principles with which those choices are based on remain the same.
Yeah.
So you having that ability to flex up and down is super beneficial. And the more time we can spend, in that initial period, learning, tracking food, it's building awareness. Mm-hmm. It's understanding our habits. And it isn't, a case of, right, we're going to have to track forever now. Because if you can track and understand your intake, your patterns of behaviours, I think that's a big one. What situations lead us to overconsume food? Or what situations lead to us not consuming food? Why are we not eating all morning? Why are we then shoveling a load of food down in the evening? Because then if we can start to understand why those behaviours happen, it's easier to navigate them and work on them. And then for the rest of your life, you've got those tools to manage nutritional intake without having to track. Some people like to track, and all it is awareness of food intake.
Yeah.
It isn't, some obsessive behaviour in most situations. It's just keeping that awareness of the food I'm consuming, especially when nowadays the choices we have aren't as straightforward as they used to be.
Yeah.
Highly processed foods, hyperpalatable foods. It's not a case of if I just eat a pretty well-balanced diet, I'll stay in a good place.
The complexity of the food today is
Yeah.
definitely much higher.
How many options are there now out there available where you could consume 1,000 calories in 10 minutes and feel no level of satisfaction?
Satisfaction, yeah.
Whereas that didn't used to be the case. So that's something that, again, some great food choices out there now. And, the options we have, amazing. From a health perspective now, the drive for higher protein options, higher nutrient, lower calorie. There are some really great benefits to that. But we just need to be aware that simple choices, made consistently over time can lead to problematic situations, just as simple choices made consistently over time can lead to great situations.
Yeah, absolutely. Just so kind of, wrap up this section. So for somebody who's listening to this out there, if we were to give few sort of pointers in the right direction in terms of, let's say somebody wants to start their own journey and they are planning to join a gym and start training consistently and regularly. As much as it is an individual thing, what would be the suggestion when it comes to either building their own training program or looking for a training program? What most people would do today, AI.
Yeah.
ChatGPT, give me a 3, 4, 5 day program. What are the considerations that people need to look at when it comes to selecting and choosing the training program?
Yeah. The primary consideration for a lot of people is going to be time commitment.
Yep.
What realistically can you afford to dedicate to the gym?
So frequency.
Yeah.
How many times a week and how much time per session?
Yeah. And then that's going to give you that window of how much training a week am I doing?
Yep.
So then within each session, we want to think about the total work we want to get in. We want to probably avoid, things like body part splits.
Mm-hmm.
No issue with body part splits, but especially for beginners.
Yeah.
When training frequency is, 3 times a week is pretty low, we're probably going to be favouring full body splits.
Mm-hmm.
3 to 4 days a week, most, especially beginners, full body splits going to be the way forward.
Yeah.
We want frequent exposure to the basic movement patterns that we need to learn.
Yep.
So we're probably going to see a lot of repetition, ideally,
Mm-hmm.
especially in those early phases.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really build that competence.
Yep.
If we're cycling through different exercises all the time, we don't get that opportunity to build that competency. But again, it's balancing that with the need for variety so we don't get bored.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, again, going to be an individual thing. If you're someone who works quite well with repetition and likes that and finds that, comforting, there's no issue with doing the same workout 3 times a week.
Yeah,
it's still going to be beneficial. If you're on the other side of that spectrum and, you need novel
Variety, yeah.
then there's no issue if you're doing 3 different workouts. Mm-hmm. You would probably still be doing, variations of the same movement patterns.
Totally.
But let's look at, think about a different option. And, it doesn't have to be a different exercise. There's variations, there's subtle things we can do. Do we go from a single arm to a double arm movement, a single leg to a double leg movement? So we're still thinking the same movement pattern, but that slight little bit of change. Do we change the implement, dumbbell row compared to a machine row? Mm-hmm. There's plenty of options there. I think the other consideration, again, is your skill level. What are you comfortable with?
Yep. So time per session, frequency, how many sessions a week, split, body parts, ideally like we said, 3 times a week. It would be ideally to do like a full body split. In terms of exercise selection, so you kind of touched on that, but I think what people need to also think about is the execution of the exercises and what will ensure a good or poor execution is going to be down to skill level. Absolutely. It's going to be down to range of motion, flexibility, mobility, all those things need to be taken into consideration before you start a training program.
Yeah.
Because doing something for the sake of doing it is just not going to really bring or yield any results. It's likely going to lead to potential risks of injury.
Yeah, and I think tying into that, the big thing is what's the focus with strength training? What are you to achieve?
So goal.
Calorie burn is a byproduct. We're not looking to burn more calories within a strength training session.
Great point.
We're looking to get stronger, build muscle, improve quality of movement. Work on maybe any structural issues we've got, and shifting the focus away from that calorie burn is a huge win, because one of the biggest issues is most wearables these days aren't going to be an accurate reflection of calorie burn anyway. So whatever number you're seeing within that session is probably nowhere near. For some individuals it will be accurate because just by chance the variables for them suit with the equations being used in the situation. But it's not going to be an accurate representation. The other thing is people seem to always forget is that if you train for an hour, the amount of calories you've burned in that hour, the number it's given you, a large percentage of that are just the calories you would have consumed if you sat still for an hour. That minimum requirement to function is pretty high. So if your watch says you burn 1,000 calories an hour, a chunk of that you would have burnt anyway. So, we've got to take that off first thing. And strength training is a pretty inefficient way to burn calories as well.
Yeah.
If we think about a typical session, for a beginner, it's going to be more on that metabolic end of the scale. So, lower rest periods, higher rep ranges, that relative intensity is going to be, fairly down the middle. We're not looking for anything crazy hard, but it's not going to be easy. From an absolute intensity standpoint, it's going to be pretty low. Because again, we can't access those areas we can as an experienced trainee. But if we want to burn calories, cardiovascular work is going to be much more beneficial, because let's see, that's spending a duration of time at high heart rate.
Yeah.
Whereas in the strength training, we're going to see those peaks when we're working sets, but then in those rest periods, we're recovering.
Yeah.
We don't have the ability to work that hard either.
Yeah.
So it's going to be, trying to really focus on the quality of the work we're doing. We want to get stronger. What do we spend most of our day doing? If we're stationary and sat down, there's probably going to be some structural things we want to work on to improve how we're feeling during the day. There's probably a lot of ranges we don't move through on a daily basis. So can we find a way to access those? Make sure we're working through them and not kind of getting locked down into positions and reducing, the movement ability we've got then throughout the day. I think it's important to understand, we talk about that skill level, what options do we have from a training perspective? If you've got a really well-equipped gym, chances are machines are going to be your best friend because we've got fixed movement patterns, we've got external stability.
Yep.
Creating stability is challenging.
Absolutely.
And it's another thing to think about. We talk about kind of the mental requirement of training. If it's a new movement, we've got to think about that. If we have to provide the stability, we have to think about that. So we've got a lot of competing demands there, where if we've got, a nice selection of machines, we're going to get all of the benefits, more of some of them. Yes, we don't work on that stability element, but we don't need to all the time, That's going to provide us with a much easier option, especially in those early days. And from a confidence perspective, if you're going in and you're working on machines for the majority of that session, you've got fixed movement patterns, which, yes, has its issues in some situations, because that movement pattern might not be suitable for you as an individual. That might cause you issues. And some machines, we don't have the ability to manipulate that enough. And in that situation, a free weight option is probably going to be better. But from a confidence perspective, from an output perspective in terms of getting that stimulus, if we can work harder on a fixed machine,
exactly,
super beneficial.
Yeah.
And as long as we're not neglecting certain areas, certain movements, we probably, in reality, for most people, want to see a combination. There's going to be machine work in there, some free weight work in there. Body weight work, is super valuable. I think the important thing people often forget when it comes to bodyweight work is, especially most bodyweight movements are hard. You know, people don't have control over their body weight.
Yeah.
They can't
Just
move
because it's
through.
body weight, people think it's easy, right? Yeah.
Yeah, but it's harder.
Yeah.
We don't have anything to work against.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we think about a squat. We get most people to, you know, perform an air squat. We're probably looking at a really poor range of motion.
Yeah.
They've got no ability to control the center of mass.
Yeah.
All they want to do is tip backwards.
100%.
So we want to think about body weight movement, but what are the regressions? What are the easy options? How can we modify that?
Mm-hmm.
You know, push-ups are a super common one. How many people do we know who can perform one?
Good push up, yeah.
Yeah, not many.
Yeah.
Never mind a set, you know, of 8, 10, 12.
Yeah.
So, you know, regressive movements, you know, incline push-ups, wonderful movement. We get all the benefits of a push-up. It's a reduced, you know, intensity. It's going to be easier for most people to perform. We can work on that movement. And all we've done is just reduce the load because we've changed the angle. Just like we would on any other exercise. You know, if we reduce the load on a bench press, it makes it easier.
Yeah.
It's the same thing when we've got a push-up and we change the angle. Yeah, we're going to slightly change the effect of it as well because that angle does have other impacts, but it makes the movement more achievable. So it's more accessible to individuals.
Yeah.
And if we've got limited equipment, you know, that's an option there. And I think it's really important for people to understand that just because something is technically a regression, it doesn't mean it's any less effective.
Yeah.
Because in most cases,
Absolutely.
it's more effective.
Yeah.
You know, and there's this kind of need to be always doing the hardest varieties of movement. But at the end of the day, we're after stimulus. And stimulus doesn't discriminate, right?
Yeah.
If you do a really poor quality movement with poor range of motion, poor control, you know, minimal reps, we're not going to get much stimulus. Whereas if we take that regression and we perform it with more intensity,
Yep.
we accumulate more
Better
work.
control, yeah, absolutely.
That, you know, that's the person who's going to grow a bigger, stronger chest. He's going to have better movement through those shoulders compared to the person who's trying to perform standard push-ups but has zero range of motion, zero control. You know, we're just going to probably get shoulder pain.
Yeah.
So being able to understand and pick the right choice, regardless of, you know, how that might make you feel from a, you know, an
Ego
advanced
perspective.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like we all have things to learn. We all have things to work on. There's not many of us out there, especially when we think about the start of a program. Most people are beginners. You know, if you want to be an intermediate, advanced trainee, it's decades, right? To really get to grips with things.
Yeah.
There's always something to learn.
I think most people, you know, want to run before they can walk, and that's the problem. It's that impatience. It's that, you know, wanting it now, and wanting to be, you know, the best at something straight away. It takes time. It takes work. It takes patience. It takes consistency. All of these things. So going back to the original sort of question or the topic of this episode, how do we achieve a successful body transformation? Like, if we were to kind of wrap it up briefly.
Yeah, I think it's that, you know, nobody likes hearing the boring words, but you know, it's consistency
Yeah.
and patience.
Yeah.
Because most transformations, if you were to look at the guys who really nail the transformations, and you look at what they do,
Yes.
it's simple.
Yeah.
It's super simple.
Basics.
It's not easy, but you know, the challenge and the complexity isn't in the program. It's in the ability to execute it
Correct.
consistently, ruthlessly, day after day, week after week. And life is what makes that challenging because things happen. You know, you're not going to just get 6 months of easy breezy.
Life gets in the way. Yeah.
Yeah, you get the occasional person who everything just lines up beautifully, and they literally have 6 months where nothing goes wrong. Life steady away, it's all great. They've got minimal responsibilities, minimal surprises, and that happens every now and again. But the reality for most of us is, you know, if we want to do something for 6 months, we have to learn how to navigate lots of barriers, lots of unexpected events. You know, most of the guys who work with, you know, they've got a job or they've got their own business. They've got kids. You know, things come up. Work expectations, requirements change. Things happen with the family. You know, they go through just all sorts of issues, health issues, injuries. you know. And I think that's one of the key things, especially when we're looking at long-term success. If you want to really change things, you know, about how you are, you know, if it's physique, health, anything along those lines, you need to be able to navigate those barriers and understand, what can I do now?
Yeah.
You know, how many guys do we have get injured? Very common, because people get injured. And there isn't necessarily always a rhyme or reason to injuries. They happen, you know. We look at the reasoning behind pain, behind injuries, like, it's hugely multifactorial. And you could train super high intensity 6 days a week for 6 months, not even have a niggle. You could train 3 times a week, low intensity, no issues whatsoever, get injured after 2 weeks. There's so many things that feed into that. So, you know, we can be sensible. We make the right choices, you know, within training. We manage stress, we manage nutrition. That's going to help reduce the risk of injury overall.
Yeah.
But injuries happen, and there isn't necessarily always blame to assign. You know, a lot of us have genetic dispositions for things to happen, you know, to get pains, niggles, issues. You know, lifestyle crops in. If you've got a desk job, we're more likely to, you know, probably come up with shoulder, elbow issues. But, you know, if you can navigate that, you know, we've got guys at the minute, right, who've got multiple injuries, issues, niggles, movement problems, health problems. But what can I do? That's the key thing.
Yeah.
Yes, you've got limitations, but life goes on. You can't just stop working because my shoulder hurts. You know, it's the same with the training nutrition. Doesn't discriminate. If you stop training totally, if you stop looking after, you know, your nutrition choices, if you just suddenly decide I'm just going to sit around all day, you're going to notice the ill effects of that. And then even from a recovery standpoint, you know, good quality nutrition is going to help recovery. Movement, most injuries are going to be better served by moving than by not moving. Yeah, we're going to adjust the workload, right? The intensity. You know, the doses in the poison. Nothing's bad. Too much is bad. Where's the sweet spot? And again, that's dynamic. You know, day to day, week to week. If you've had a really stressful day at work, you've had a terrible night's sleep, you're dehydrated and you've eaten next to no food, you're probably going to have a pretty poor training session and things are going to feel awful. So maybe you just don't bother that day. Knowing that the next day you're going to be in a much better place, things can happen. That ability to be able to step back and go, not today, is huge. And it can be hard, especially when, again, you're on a program, you're on a journey. I don't want to miss a session. You know, I don't want to not tick a box. But not ticking one box and then ticking them moving forward is much better than ticking that one box and then not ticking 10 because things have got worse.
Yeah.
And it's a challenging thing to do, but knowing when to push and when to pull back, that's you know, it's a skill. It takes practice, takes time. You know, we have a good idea of when people should do that, and that's from years of experience and working with different individuals. But a lot of the time, especially as, you know, beginners, it's difficult to know that. So having somebody help you navigate that journey, you know, and we say to a lot of individuals, you know, this is the best time to get injured. And that doesn't always, you know, make sense to me initially because I'm trying to make a transformation. Injury is not good because now I can't train. And it's like, yeah, but if this happened when you had no support and no guidance, how would you navigate it? Whereas now we're in that position where we can give you the tools indefinitely to manage injuries, to manage pain, niggles, and even, you know, the unexpected circumstances. How do I deal with that? You know, I'm going to a restaurant. How do I deal with that?
Yeah.
It's thinking if you've got the tools, you're equipped for however long.
Absolutely. So we've got consistency, we've got patience. It is the guys that get the best transformations and the biggest successes are the ones that show up every day. They communicate, that are honest, transparent. They tick boxes on a daily basis. They are not entirely focused on the end goal. They are very much in the process. They fall in love with the process. They execute. And again, communicate. I think communication is a big one. Having that accountability, obviously, from us as a team of coaches is incredibly valuable. I think that is probably, you know, 70 to 80% of the success that people achieve. It's because, think about it, if you're a solo rider and you have high levels of motivation at the beginning at some point, when you hit a plateau or when shit happens, because life gets in the way, the likelihood of you falling off that wagon is very, very high. Whereas if you are on the program and you have a team of coaches who are behind you, who communicate with you, who keep you accountable, all of that means that the success rate is going up and the likelihood of you succeeding is very high. So these are the sort of qualities that that we look for when it comes to achieving a successful body transformation. Can you think of anything else?
I think a big one for a lot of people is being able to accept and understand that you don't know best.
Yeah.
You know, it's very easy that to convince ourselves we've got all the answers, we should be doing this, we should be doing that, you know, as an individual, and then collectively as, you know, a group with friends, with family, you know, and it's a hard thing to admit, you don't know the answers, but the question, you know, why are you in the situation you're in?
Yeah.
If you knew what you should be doing,
Yeah, you wouldn't be in that situation.
yeah, and you'd be doing it. Or if you knew how to do it, you'd be doing it.
Yeah.
So that ability to, you know, understand and listen, and I think, you know, be teachable, because
Yeah,
it's
being
fine.
coachable is massive. I
Yeah.
think, yeah, absolutely. I
We
agree.
can give you the information, but, you know, you have to take it on board.
Mhm.
And I think the important thing for us is, you know, you talk about communication, and very much so from a, you know, client standpoint, that's huge. But from, you know, communication, it's about being understood. You know, we can say what we want time and time again, but if it's not being, you know, received and understood in a way that allows that individual to then action that information, that's not effective communication. And that's why, you know, we find across the board with the different guys we work with, those communication styles differ massively.
Yeah.
Some people, you know, love depth and breadth of knowledge. They want to know the whys. They want to really understand everything. Some people, that's not for them.
Yeah.
And they just want to know, right, what are the action steps? You know, give me a little bit of justification, because that's always going to help with compliance, right? But they just literally want to be told what to do, when to do it,
Crack
how
on
to do
with
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's fine. And you know, it's what works for you as an individual. But there always has to be some form of communication, because if we don't know there is a problem or what the problem is,
Yeah.
we can't fix it.
No, I think it's communication and transparency is a huge one. Like honesty and transparency for me is almost like the foundation of that really breeds that success, because the more open, transparent, and communicative you are with us as coaches, your coaches, again, the likelihood of you succeeding grows massively. The more we know and understand what's going on, the better we're able to help you. The better we are equipped to help you. If we don't know what's going on and you disappear and you don't communicate, that doesn't help anybody.
Yeah,
So,
there's
yeah.
going to be days, weeks where stuff doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Not an issue. But if we can figure out why, you might not know yourself why, but you provide that information. You know, we're going to see a lot of patterns individuals don't see. And it's not always down to a knowledge or an experience standpoint, but it's we have all the information. We can then look at all the data points we've got, you know, the history we've, you know, collated on that individual through the months of coaching, and we can see really obvious things that they can't see. And we all have blind spots. It's very easy to convince ourselves there's no reason why this happened or that happened. It's just whatever.
Yeah.
But if you can communicate around, you know, why something hasn't happened, it's very easy to then change things, rather than blindly going on for months where things aren't working, hiding things, or, you know, not providing that information. Nobody benefits from that. Whereas if we can have kind of that honest, blunt conversation, you know, right, this probably isn't the appropriate training program for you because you're not completing it.
Yeah.
It meets all the criteria you provided us, but it's not happening. So something obviously isn't as you've said it is, which is fine, but we need to know what the reality is, and we'll make the relevant changes.
Yeah. Great. So I think also, like, it goes under the umbrella of being coachable. I think a lot of men especially, and we mainly deal with men, I think it's the ego side of things. Most men think that they can do everything themselves. I think it's just the nature of guys. They have the ability to go on the internet, do a bit of research, and be expert in that particular area. So I would say, you know, in a lot of cases, it's about dropping that ego. And if you do feel that you need help, just reach out. outsource that part to somebody who knows what they're doing, a team of experienced coaches who can help you achieve great success in a much safer, more efficient way, where you can not only save yourself a lot of time, money, risk of injury, all of that. So yeah, I think that would be one of the biggest messages. So again, now somebody's looking to achieve transformation, and they kind of like feel like, do I need this? Do I not? I think a good place for somebody like that would be to not only go and visit the website www.martinbugai.com and go and look through all the transformations that we have done with our clients, look at the results, watch the interviews with the clients. We, majority of our clients are based in the US. They come over, we sit down, we do the podcast, that's why we do it. You can also go to the resources tab on our website, and you can actually check and get a score. You can go to the Ultimate MOT, Physique MOT, and you can do a test where you'll get a score that will show you where you actually are from a health perspective, in terms of your lifestyle, your stress, your sleep, recovery, all of those things. It will score you at the end, and then you can see where you actually are and whether you qualify for potentially something like this. Cool. Anything to kind of add to everything that we've said? Anything that we didn't mention? I know it's a bit of a lengthy one, but I feel like it was needed for a lot of people to kind of understand what is it that we do, how we do it, and the complexity of everything, and the individual aspect and the bespoke nature of everything that we do. Because it's not just, here is the plan, here is the meal plan, off you go, let's hope for the best. We do work with these guys very, very closely, day to day, checking everything in and out to make sure that they are succeeding.
Yeah, and it's it's like every facet of life. You can do things by yourself, and more often than not, a lot of people will succeed. But the challenging areas where if you've been trying time and time again and you're not achieving the results you want, the chances are you're not capable of doing it by yourself, and it's by no means a bad thing. How many areas of life would we not be able to navigate?
Totally.
Solo. It's why we have
almost every other area of your life you would pretty much outsource or delegate to an expert or specialist.
Yeah, and it's that thing of you still might get there, and it's not a bad thing at all. Not everybody needs that help, but can you accelerate your journey? Most likely.
Totally.
Can you learn things you wouldn't learn? Most probably. I think the biggest thing is, as human beings, we're very, very good at justifying pretty much anything to ourselves. And that can be, a downfall at times where we're making the wrong decisions, we're struggling with progress, but there's always a reason. We can always back it up. Sometimes legitimately, sometimes not. But, if you can have that help along the journey, the structure, the accountability, you remove kind of that trial and error process.
Yes.
And often it'll take years and years of trying by yourself before you feel like you're in the position where, do you know what, I probably need help. And that's fine. It's like every lesson in life. It always takes a lot longer to learn than we want it to. But by the time we've learned it pretty damn well.
Yeah.
And, how many guys who reach out and join the program, it doesn't take long for them to realise they probably should have reached out sooner, or they wish they were involved with some form of coaching earlier on. But hindsight's a wonderful thing. And, the hard lessons we learn only come from going through the experiences. We, it's like everything in life, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
You have to go through that. So I think it's asking for help isn't a bad thing, as across all areas of life, right? But it is always tougher. I think, especially in the world, sometimes being able to kind of just take that step and reach out to somebody. But there's no judgment, and I think there's no obligation. Have a conversation.
Totally.
See what's what. Yep. You might even learn something that you take away, and that's it. But there isn't really anything to lose. And again, we experience it. We're not going to work with individuals who aren't a good fit, because for us it's not beneficial. And if it's not enjoyable for us,
It's definitely
What's
not
the point,
enjoyable.
right?
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's a great point. I think, you know, if somebody out there is actually listening to this and thinking about inquiring or just wanting to, you know, understand how the process works, etc., just book a strategy call. It's, again, like Chris said, no obligation. We'll have a chat. The whole point of it is to really understand you as an individual, understand your goals, what is it that you want to achieve, and provide as much value as possible on that call. It's not about getting you to sign into the program, because, again, we need to be the right fit, and there are a lot of criteria that need to be met from both sides for us to be a good match. And, you know, just book the call. Let's jump on that call and find out whether we can help you. And then very briefly, sort of generally speaking, there's, I would say, 3 types of people that we work with. It's the guys that want to lose weight, it's the guys that want to build muscle, and it's the guys that are kind of bang in the middle. They sort of in a good shape, but they are struggling to get to the next level. And we've had a lot of great successes with you know, all 3. But, you know, the guys that are kind of in the middle, they've been training for years. They sort of in a good nick, but, you know, they want to take things to the next level. So if that's also your goal, we are here to help you. Anything else?
Nope.
Good stuff. Chris, thanks a lot. And we best get back to work and get these guys in shape.
Definitely.
Been a pleasure, mate. Thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode and felt inspired and would like to find out more about my body transformation program, please visit my website at www.martinbugai.com or message me on Instagram at martinbugayfitness, and we can schedule a free strategy call where we can discuss your goals and find out more about how I can help you transform your body and your health.